"Max, stop it, just stop," Richard shouted as he grabbed the golden retriever by the collar and pulled him away from the living room curtains, and if you could have seen the look on his face in that moment, you would have seen pure frustration, because this was the fourth time today that this dog had destroyed something in the house, and this time it was the expensive silk curtains that his wife had imported from Italy, now hanging in shreds from the brass rod, and the two children standing in the corner looked heartbroken, their little faces twisted with confusion as they watched their father scold the dog they loved more than anything in the world, and Max, this beautiful 4-year-old golden retriever with sad amber eyes, just stood there taking it, his body tense, his ears flat against his head. But what Richard didn't notice, what nobody in that room understood yet, was that Max wasn't looking at Richard at all, he was looking past him, toward the wall behind the children, and there was something in that gaze that spoke of urgency, of desperation, of a warning that no one was ready to hear. But to understand how this family got to this breaking point, we need to go back a few weeks, because Richard Coleman wasn't just any father, he was the founder and CEO of a tech empire worth over $4 billion, a man who had built his fortune on logic, precision, and control, and in his world, everything had a system, everything had a place, and when something didn't fit the system, it was a problem to be solved or eliminated. And that's exactly how he had started to see Max, as a problem, which was strange because just 6 months ago, Richard had been the one who brought Max home, surprising his two kids, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Lucas, with the puppy they had been begging for, and back then Max was perfect, a fluffy bundle of joy who made the children laugh and gave the massive empty mansion something it had been missing for years, warmth. Richard's wife had passed away 3 years earlier, and since then, he had thrown himself into work, leaving the children in the care of nannies and housekeepers, and he knew, deep down, that he wasn't giving them what they needed, so Max was supposed to fix that. Max was supposed to fill the gaps that Richard couldn't, and for a while, it worked, because Max became Emma and Lucas's shadow, following them everywhere, sleeping outside their bedroom doors, sitting at their feet during breakfast. And the bond between those kids and that dog was the kind of thing you see in movies, pure and unbreakable, and Richard appreciated it, he really did, until about 3 weeks ago when everything started to change. It began with small things, little moments that seemed like nothing at first, like Max suddenly barking at the walls for no reason, or scratching at the baseboards in the hallway near the kids' playroom, and the first few times it happened, Richard just assumed the dog heard a mouse or smelled something strange, but then the behavior got worse. Max started knocking things over, pushing furniture, standing in doorways and refusing to let the children pass. And one afternoon Richard came home to find Max had somehow dragged Lucas's favorite blanket out of his room and deposited it in the backyard, and when Richard asked the nanny what happened, she just shrugged and said Max had been acting strange all day, restless and agitated, and Richard felt the first flicker of annoyance because this wasn't the calm, obedient dog he had brought home, this was something else entirely, and as the days passed, that flicker grew into a flame. The breaking point came when Max started disrupting Richard's work calls, something that was absolutely unacceptable in a house where business came first, and one afternoon Richard was on a video conference with investors from Tokyo when Max burst into the office barking wildly, jumping at the window, clawing at the glass, and Richard had to mute himself and physically drag the dog out of the room, apologizing to his colleagues with a tight smile. While his blood boiled underneath, and that night at dinner, he told the children that if Max didn't start behaving, they might have to find him a new home, and the way Emma's face crumbled, the way Lucas's eyes filled with tears, it should have stopped him, it should have made him reconsider, but Richard was too frustrated to see clearly, too caught up in the chaos to ask the question that mattered most: why was Max acting this way? The next few days were a nightmare of escalating incidents, Max chewing through the power cord of the lamp in the playroom, Max barking at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, Max physically blocking Emma from walking down the hallway toward the west wing of the house, and every single time Richard saw disobedience, he saw a dog who had lost his training, a dog who was acting out for attention, and he never once stopped to consider that maybe, just maybe, Max was trying to tell him something. Because here's the thing about dogs, they don't have words, they can't sit you down and explain what's wrong, so when they sense danger, when they feel something that humans can't perceive, they do the only thing they can, they act, and sometimes those actions look crazy, sometimes they look destructive, but that doesn't mean they don't have purpose. And so we arrive back at that moment in the living room, with the shredded curtains and the angry billionaire and the 2 heartbroken children, and Richard is standing there with his hand on Max's collar, ready to make a decision that he will regret for the rest of his life, because he's about to call the trainer who had mentioned a behavioral facility upstate, a place where problem dogs go when families can't handle them anymore. And Emma is crying, begging her father not to send Max away. And Lucas is hugging the dog's neck so tight that Max can barely breathe, but even in that moment, even with a child wrapped around him and tears falling onto his fur, Max is not focused on the drama happening around him. He's still staring at that wall, still trying to communicate something that no one is willing to hear, and then, without warning, he breaks free. Richard doesn't even have time to react before Max launches himself across the room, not toward the door, not toward freedom, but toward the children, and for one horrifying second Richard thinks the dog has finally snapped. He thinks Max is about to hurt Emma and Lucas, and his heart stops, his body freezes, but then he sees what Max is actually doing. He's pushing the children, herding them away from the wall, away from the corner of the room where they had been standing, and before Richard can ask what's happening, before he can even form the question in his mind, he hears it, a sound that will haunt him forever, a deep, groaning crack that seems to come from inside the walls themselves, and then the ceiling above where the children had been standing just seconds ago collapses in a thunderous crash of plaster and wood and metal, sending a cloud of white dust billowing through the room, and when the debris finally settles, when Richard can finally see again, he finds Max standing over Emma and Lucas like a shield, his body positioned between them and the destruction, and the children are crying, clutching the dog who just saved their lives, and Richard is standing there with his mouth open, his hands shaking, his entire world collapsing around him in a different way than the ceiling just did. For a long moment, nobody moves, nobody speaks, there's just the sound of settling debris and the children's quiet sobs and Max's heavy panting, and then slowly, like a man waking from a dream, Richard walks toward the destruction and looks up at the gaping hole in his ceiling, and what he sees makes his blood run cold, because there, exposed by the collapse, is a massive wooden beam that had been rotting from the inside out, a beam that structural engineers had apparently missed during the last inspection, a beam that had been ready to give way at any moment, and as Richard stares at it, his mind starts working backward, rewinding through the past 3 weeks like a movie playing in reverse, and suddenly everything Max did starts to make terrible, beautiful sense. The scratching at the baseboards, Max had been trying to show them where the damage was spreading, the barking at the walls, he could hear the wood creaking, groaning, threatening to give way, the way he blocked the children from entering certain rooms, he knew those areas weren't safe, the chewed power cord in the playroom, that room was directly below the weakest section of the beam, and Max was trying to get everyone out, and the shredded curtains, those curtains hung right next to the wall. That was about to fail, and Max was doing everything he could, everything in his limited power, to warn them, to save them, and Richard had called him naughty, Richard had threatened to send him away, Richard had almost gotten rid of the one creature in this house who had been paying attention, who had been watching over his children when he was too busy with work to notice that his own home was falling apart around them. The guilt that washes over Richard in that moment is unlike anything he has ever felt in his 52 years of life. It's a physical sensation, a weight that presses down on his chest and makes it hard to breathe, because he thinks about all the times he yelled at Max, all the times he pushed him away, all the times he looked at this loyal, devoted dog with frustration and anger instead of trying to understand what he was so desperately trying to say, and the worst part, the part that makes Richard's eyes burn with tears he hasn't shed since his wife's funeral, is that through all of it, through every scolding and every punishment and every threat, Max never stopped trying, he never gave up on his mission to protect these children, he just kept going, kept warning, kept putting himself between danger and the family he loved, and that kind of loyalty, that kind of devotion, it's not something you can buy with all the money in the world. It's not something you can build with logic and systems and control, it's something pure and rare and precious, and Richard had almost thrown it away. He crosses the room slowly, his expensive shoes crunching on plaster and debris, and he kneels down in front of Max, in front of this dog he had so badly misjudged, and he doesn't know what to say. There are no words that feel adequate, so instead he just reaches out and places his hand on Max's head, and the dog looks at him with those amber eyes, not with reproach, not with resentment, just with the same calm, steady love he's always had. And Richard breaks, he finally breaks, the tears falling freely now as he wraps his arms around Max's neck and holds him tight, and Emma and Lucas join the embrace, and for a few minutes the four of them just stay there in the wreckage, a billionaire who thought he knew everything learning from a dog what it truly means to protect the ones you love. In the weeks that follow, everything changes in the Coleman household, and it starts with Richard taking a step back from work, actually being present for breakfast and dinner, actually sitting with his children in the evenings, and Max is right there with them, no longer treated as a problem to be solved but as a hero to be honored, and Richard hires the best structural engineers in the country to inspect every inch of the mansion. And they find more damage than anyone expected, old wood rot that had been hidden behind the walls for years, and they tell Richard that if the ceiling had collapsed while the children were sleeping, if it had happened at night instead of during the day, the outcome could have been tragically different, and every time Richard hears this, he looks at Max and feels that wave of gratitude wash over him again, because this dog, this so-called naughty dog, had been fighting a battle that nobody else could see, and he had won. There's a moment about a month after the collapse that Richard will remember for the rest of his life. It's late evening and he's sitting in the newly repaired living room, and Emma is curled up on one end of the couch reading a book, and Lucas is on the floor building something with blocks, and Max is lying between them, his head on his paws, his eyes moving back and forth between the two children like he's counting them, making sure they're both still there, and Richard watches this scene and realizes that this is what he had been missing, this is what his money could never buy, this simple, quiet, profound love that fills a room without asking for anything in return, and he thinks about how close he came to destroying it, how close he came to sending away the guardian angel who walks on four legs, and he makes a silent promise to himself that he will never again mistake loyalty for disobedience, that he will never again let his frustration blind him to what really matters. And maybe that's the lesson here, maybe that's what Max was teaching all along, not just Richard but all of us, because how many times in our lives do we push away the people who are trying to help us? How many times do we misread concern as criticism, protection as control, love as inconvenience? How many times do we punish the ones who are fighting for us simply because we don't understand the battle they're waging? And the truth is, sometimes the ones who seem the most disruptive, the most difficult, the most naughty, are the ones who see what we can't, who hear what we're deaf to, who sense the danger that we're too distracted to notice, and they don't have the words to explain it, so they just act, and we judge them for it, and we resent them for it, and sometimes we push them away just when we need them most, and if we're lucky, if we're really, really lucky, we figure it out in time, before it's too late, before we lose them forever. So here's what I want to ask you today: has there ever been someone in your life who you misjudged, someone whose actions didn't make sense until later, someone who was trying to protect you in ways you couldn't understand at the time? Maybe it was a parent, a friend, a partner, or maybe, like Richard, it was a four-legged family member who loved you more than you knew. Drop your story in the comments, because I have a feeling there are a lot of us who have been there, who have learned this lesson the hard way. And if this story touched your heart today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with the dog lovers in your life, with the parents who are doing their best, with anyone who might need a reminder that loyalty doesn't always look the way we expect it to, and sometimes, the ones who seem the most naughty are actually the most brave.